Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Shape the System. I'm here today with Prateek Joshi. Joshi, thank you. I probably should have asked that before the show. I'm usually better at that. Now, Prateek's from Plutoshift, and we're going to talk about Plutoshift later. But this is actually one of the first times on the show we've had an opportunity to talk about data and the application of data. And I know that's a broad term. We'll dive into it in a minute. But the application of data for sustainability aims generally. And so before we kind of talk about solutions and what's happening in the market, Prateek, I'd really like to understand kind of the context that we're in today, like the companies that you're working with or that you're seeing in the market generally, like what do their objectives look like at the moment with respect to sustainability, and how are they right now thinking about data with respect to that?
The companies that we see in the market, so first of all, more companies are becoming conscious about having sustainability goals. That's right. First of all, that's the huge seismic shift, right? That's fantastic. Right. The companies are openly declaring that, hey, here's what we want to achieve. Right. And in terms of the exact goals, that depends on the company, the industry. So some people want to get to net zero, like in terms of carbon. Right. Some companies want to reduce their chemical consumption. Some people want to reduce their energy consumption, water consumption. So many different shapes and forms in which this is shaping up. And it starts with knowing what's happening within the company, meaning for a global company with operations across dozens and dozens of countries, to really measure your sustainability, your ESG footprint, very diligent about collecting data and then mapping that to ESG metrics, right? So a lot of that, companies are getting diligent about doing that and recognizing the fact that it has to be done, but realizing it, and as in making it practical, making it real. That's where many companies are focusing their efforts on right now.
Okay, and I'm going to dive into a few different parts of this. The first part of this is in like the motivation of this company. You said, hey, look, they want to do the thing, right? I want to get to net zero, or I want to reduce, we're a chemical plant. We want to work out how to use less chemicals to produce the gold that we produce. This may not be a good example, but you can correct me. Yeah. Firstly, just what do you think is changing or is driving this objective now? Is it just this popular narrative where people are like, hey, we have to be doing better? Are there different people working in these organizations that have come from a different place? Like, what's changing or has changed?
Yeah, a couple of different things they're coming together. One, it is becoming a business imperative, right? So when it comes to, let's say, you're a company that makes a physical product, right? Let's say beer, ketchup, or cheese. Now,
sorry, I'm just trying to dive into these. Beer, ketchup, and cheese. Perfect.
Yeah. Was that the example? Okay, great. So the rule that the same company has to make all three. No, I'm kidding. But if you're a company that makes a physical product, right, it just makes good business sense to consume less energy to make that product. It's just like ESG or not, it's just good business sense to do it.
Because energy costs money, or
energy.
But don't be trite, but yeah.
Let's set ESG aside for a second. If we just look at to make the product, what are the line items? Like, what costs them money to make this product? And at the very top of the list, right, electricity. It's like unanimously the most expensive line item on the thing. Okay. Electricity, chemicals, like just buying resources
input
to make the product. It's very expensive. So ESG or not, if you can consume, say, 20% less electricity to make a unit of your product, it directly goes into your bottom line. So it just makes good business sense. And it just so happens that energy and chemicals and water have a very large impact on your carbon footprint. So it's just a very good confluence. It just so happens that the thing that's the most expensive also happens to have a very direct impact on your ESG footprint. So this has led to a movement where, one, it's just good business sense to do it. Two, by becoming more sustainable, you can attract talent. Like in today's modern age, if you conduct a survey, a majority of the people want to do something about sustainability, climate. Like if you, let's say there's a war for talent, company A is big on ESG, company B doesn't care about ESG. Both are equally big, equally powerful. Company A is going to win the talent war because that's how it is, right? And three, just the kind of structures or the capital you can attract. Again, this is just purely from a business sense. If you're sustainable, if you're net zero, net negative, you can attract a good amount of capital across a wide variety of domains. So it's just these are multiple factors converging that is kind of making companies pursue this with vigor.
And just probably jumping back to that first point where you sort of indicate that, hey, if you use less water and less chemicals and less energy, then you're going to go straight to your bottom line. That would have been true 10 years or 20 or 30 years ago, I think. I'm assuming so.
Right.
Did something change now where it's like, hey, these things are we're more constrained in the current world, or the world's more competitive, so your margins are thinner and you need that more than you would have done 30 years ago? Something changed in that particular kind of part of the macro?
Yeah. So two things then. One is resources that they keep getting expensive, meaning to buy a unit of chemicals or to buy a unit of electricity, it's just becoming more expensive if you just compare decade over decade. So that cost is rising. And also, it's not that people didn't want to do it 50 years ago, but the problem is if you have 1,000 facilities, to make these operational decisions, you need access to data, like real-time data to say, okay, my facility number 72 is eating up 10x more electricity. Let me do something. That the only way to find that out is you either call somebody or drive there and write on a piece of paper, make some compute. It's just not sustainable. Just operations-wise. So in the last, call it 10, 15 years, low-cost sensors, connectivity everywhere, the cost of accessing data is just going down. So it's just, I think, access to data. There's kind of sensors that can talk to the internet and just everything. The infra has been commoditized. So now companies can actually afford to do it, meaning low cost, connectivity is great, and there's intent.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting because I think I tend to talk about this idea that there's two types of problems. There's unbounded problems, which is unlimited upside. Hey, let's sell as much of this thing as we can, right? So marketing and sales and everyone's going to want the widget. They don't really need it, but we're going to work out how to sell billions of them by making it attractive, like drive the demand side. And optimization problems, right? Where people are like, there is a limited amount of demand for this thing or a set amount of demand, and just simply making it cheaper is probably not going to shift that yield, that curve too much. But our ability to be profitable is going to be, especially in commoditized markets like the ones, ketchup, beer, and what was the other thing? Cheese?
Cheese.
are driven by optimization problems of just how do we operate more efficiently. And talk just a bit before about sensors and connectivity. And, I guess the ability to roll out a bunch of things. I actually had a friend and co-founder actually who worked at a company, and they were putting sensors on oil wells. Like in Australia, you don't understand this concept, but in the US, they have those things that are in the Westerns, right? Like those, I don't know what they're called, but they're donkeys, I think they're called. Is that what they're called? They're like an oil donkey. They're like the thing that goes left and right, and in all Thelma and Louise, all these kind of films.
Right.
And they were attaching an Internet of Things sensor to that to understand the flow of those, to know which wells were underperforming. And the question I was sort of going to get to, and that's one of 1,000 examples, not a sustainability one, that's working out how to get more gas out of the ground. Different story. Was have we we've created an opportunity. Now we have all the data, and now we can send that. Is now the challenge and the problem here operationalizing and understanding that data? Is that part of where you and Plutoshift as an example, but companies generally are saying, "Cool, now what do we do?"
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So the 2010s, the decade, that was dedicated to commoditizing data collection, meaning, let's say before that, the sensors were bulky, they were heavy, they were expensive. Even if a company wanted to do something, like too expensive. There's no well-defined ROI, too expensive, let's not do it. So 2010s, the decade was dedicated to commoditizing the whole thing so that there really is no risk right now, because big companies have come in, they've built the sensors, the infrastructure, the hardware, the software. So if a new company wants to instrument one of their facilities with sensors and data collection, it's now very well defined, clean, right? So they know, okay, I put in X dollars, I'm going to get Y back. Great, that's done. Now, because of that, this field is attracting more builders, like software builders, because now the hardware problem, the data collection problem, that's been more or less solved. Now, what can we do with the data that's sitting here? And many interesting applications can come out of that. Like, for example, one, I want to know, as you said, I have 1,000 sites around the world. I want to know which one is underperforming, like right now. Or let's say I have the world's best, like out of my 1,000, I want to take the one that is the best, and I want to take the best practices to my other facilities. So it can go both ways, but just this facilitation of having access to continuous good data is opening up all sorts of opportunities. And that's where Plutoshift comes in. We put that data to use. In our case, we help companies monitor their physical infrastructure and detect and predict events of interest. Basically, without a tool like this, there might be a spike in electricity consumption, and you won't know about it for weeks or months, right? Because we have too much going on. So a tool like this, if you help prevent spikes in consumption, or if you help detect that an asset went down, or you help forecast what should the chemical dosing be for the next 7 days.
What's chemical dosing, by the way?
Chemical dosing is just determining the amount of chemicals that you got to put in so that the product actually comes out. A simple example is, let's say there's wastewater and you got to dispose it. And before that, you got to clean it up. So you need to inject chemicals, clean it up, and then let it go. So that's a simple example of chemical dosing.
Right, got it. Okay.
Yeah. That's how this is shaping up.
Okay, yeah. And so, cool. We've created a context where there's a whole bunch of companies around the world, a lot of them probably operating in commoditized areas. I think the thing that people often don't fully, not even understand, but maybe appreciate, is the scale at which some of these companies operate. The idea that a multinational operates 1,000 sites to do wastewater treatment, and I'm turning the tap off and having shorter showers. And it is important for individuals to do their job and their role in all of this. Obviously, I'm not discounting that. Right. But I do think we don't really fully appreciate the massive lever that mid to large multinationals and enterprise have in changing how we consume resources and how we, and the net outputs of those. So I want to talk about two things with respect to that. The first thing I'm trying to understand is obviously knowing what to measure to work out how to operate more efficiently feels relatively straightforward, right? Okay, this is how much energy is it, or what is the chemical, or how much water do you need to use? Yeah. I think the first question I've got is, how is monitoring helping to understand how to reduce those things rather than just avoid disruptions? And the second thing, which is probably more the link back to impact, is how do you draw the connection between the thing that you're monitoring and the impact that you're having? Some of it might be direct, you use less electricity, but other things might be these secondary inputs and outcomes, that aren't related to the specific use of the energy, but the impact that you have in the broader world, like how you treat all this wastewater, but you're only treating it to 94%. If you treat it to 98%, the river that it gets poured into or the ocean would be better. And how do you potentially censor and mentor that? They're my two main questions on this.
Yeah, it's actually a really good, two good questions here. The first one, I'll take an example. It's in 2022, big systems, they don't really kind of go down unless there's a catastrophic event, right? Because there's backup of a backup, because big companies, they don't want any unexpected shutdown. So they have a lot of backup. Right. Now, what does happen is a system stays up and start sucking up like 5x more energy, and nobody will know unless somebody looks at it. So an example would be, let's say you're a company and you need clean water to make your beverage, and you have like hundreds of membranes in series and parallel where raw water goes in, clean water comes out through this process. Now, for some reason, and again, different membranes, they foul at different rates, they filter at different rates, different companies. So let's say that you are operating this and membrane number 37 is just starts fouling fast, and then it starts eating up 10x more electricity.
Right.
Now, that is the key problem. Is not that membrane number 37, that system went down. No, it's up, and it's eating up a lot more electricity. And if by the way this problem is solved today without any software is somebody, a human, a person, an operator, they have to do a round robin method, meaning they check membrane number 1. Okay, it's doing well. Let's go to the next one. It's doing well. By the time you get to the right one, it's like weeks or months, because it's just a very, these are like complicated systems that manually, yeah. So that is how to make a difference, or the way you reduce consumption of resources. It's by these operational decisions that get made on an hourly basis, right? So you come into a shift at 9 o'clock, what needs your attention, right? If you pay attention to the right one, you reduce your electricity bill for the day, for the week, for the month, right? So if you keep doing it over a period of 12 months, the impact is enormous. Like a 20% difference for a Fortune 500 company, it's tens of millions of dollars. In fact, hundreds of millions for some companies, right? So that's the delta we are looking at here.
Yeah. And I want to get to that because I think the impact for the company, if they can reduce it down to dollars, to your point earlier about ROI, it's a clear path to let's keep doing more of this or find other ways to do it. How do they then connect that or even externalize the impact that to be able to say, hey, we reduced wastewater usage by X or, chemicals by Y? Is that a role that Plutoshift or the sensors are playing in trying to collect that data or to create that data?
Yeah, actually, you brought up one of the hardest problems that companies are trying to solve is connecting the investment amount to the ROI. Meaning, hey, I'm a company, I run facilities. If I invest $1 into this, what am I getting out of it? Meaning, I want to achieve our sustainability goals, but what's the exact ROI? And it gets very tricky because, as you said, there are so many moving parts along the way that the attribution becomes a very interesting challenge here. And that is exactly what we solve. And the way we solve it, again, many ways of solving it. The way we solve it is we isolate the process to make sure that there aren't any stray dependencies, because precisely the point is to demonstrate that, hey, look at this isolated process. We demonstrated a delta of 22%. It means that you put in $1 into making this more efficient, and it resulted in this exact metric. Now, once you have that proof, the template, then you scale it up across the enterprise, and then that's how you do it. But the way we found it is it's a notoriously difficult problem because it gets tangled along the way. So that's why I think isolating a process and being very diligent about tracking is very important.
Yeah, and just I guess there's two parts to that I'm interested in. One is this idea that, hey, in a tsunami of data, I'm guessing that's what happens. You get 1,000 sites and you get 100 sensors per site. Is that kind of the order of magnitude here? Like there's
no, it's like a couple of zeros missing there. Like the good companies.
I'm going to have more of these throughout. As I said, I know very little about this topic.
Right.
So tens of thousands of data points that are trying to work in so clearly there's not a human alive who can synthesize that data and try to understand the relationships. So it's not just that there is a collection of data challenge that's largely being solved, as you said, through this hardware, and synthesizing this data and understanding what's signal and what's noise, I'm guessing, and then connecting those two things. And then there's the downstream of that, which is to be able for a company to be able to say, right back here at the start, we decided we had an objective, which was to reduce our environmental footprint. We want to translate this business case into those terms. We do want to make a ROI on it as well. We want to be able to sustainably do this financially, but we do want to translate that. Is part of this about being able to say to the organization, hey, we've observed this problem with membranes, and we've observed when this problem happens, it causes this amount of energy excess usage, within our own system, regardless of what the outside world's doing with energy. And as a result, by implementing changes that catch that stuff earlier and address that stuff earlier, we're able to then say with some degree of authority, this is the environmental impact that this stuff had. Is that how that works?
Yeah. A good framework to use here is, what's the status quo? Meaning without a data platform or a data tool, what happened last year? For example, let's look at the last 12 months and just measure everything. Like establishing a baseline is a fantastic way to start because, you come in, you implement a new system, it does something. Okay, what's the change? Like compared to what, right? So establishing a baseline is something that we learned. And then after a couple of mistakes, we learned that establishing a baseline is an absolute must. So step one, that's what we do. And here's what we do is we go in, we look at historically 12 months, 24 months of data and say, hey, this is what we found. This is the status quo about energy consumption, your operation. This is the reality. Now, do we agree that this is in fact the reality? And then we go back and forth a little bit and then agree. Because without an agreement, the new system is kind of pointless because what is a new system doing, right? Nobody knows because nobody knew the baseline. So yes, I think going in, establishing a baseline, and then at the end of every week, every month, comparing the delta that's where the real kind of magic happens. And again, through this process, if you're disciplined about it, you get to reconcile the business value, meaning you established a baseline, you created some business value. And again, when I say business value, it could be financial, could be ESG, could be both. It helps us quantify how you helped us move the needle and by how much, right? And then that's how we have seen once we are very clear about that, it kind of people light up. Like it's like, oh my God, this is amazing because now I know exactly what to present to my peers, to my leadership. And it's a nice win here.
Yeah. And just talking a little bit about the way that machine learning and AI and any other buzzword I associate with data, those terms all still mean things, right? Like there is a specific meaning for machine learning versus, other type of it. Just can you give me some definitions for some of this stuff and I will jump back to my question?
Yeah, of course. To me, AI is the goal. Right. And machine learning is a vehicle to get there. And data acts as a fuel for that vehicle. So that's how I relate these terms. And when I say goal, the goal is, it could be a simple goal like, hey, I want a system that can predict spikes 24 hours in advance. That's the goal. That's a smart goal. Yep. And you use machine learning to build a system to achieve that goal. And the operational data becomes a fuel. The more data you have, the better the vehicle would be, the faster you'll get there. So that's how I relate these terms.
That's really interesting. I've always thought of AI kind of gets put into this bucket of some all-seeing, overbearing God that we're handing our existence to. But the idea that what you're really saying is that if we want to know things, we need an intelligence. And that intelligence might do one job, which is to know when spikes are going to happen. And our job is to give it fuel and train it using machine learning models to create that intelligence for that particular problem. I've never heard it explained that way. That's I'm definitely going to use that. Hopefully other people take that on. The thing I was going to ask about kind of not so much data, but machine learning and AI in that context with that definition exactly. Are you seeing are commonalities evident when you look at a wastewater treatment plant in Mumbai and a wastewater treatment plant in Sydney? Are there similarities in, hey, the data and the machine learning models are applicable in both, or are those problems separable? And then probably the adjunct to that is if you're looking at wastewater machine learning models that are resulting in AI around energy spikes, can those models potentially be predictive in some way or useful in totally unrelated fields of manufacturing that might also involve water, like the Coca-Cola example that you gave?
Yeah, this is a very interesting thought experiment and something which can have very practical impact as well. So when we think of commonalities across various fields, industries, to me, it can come from three basic aspects.
Sure.
First one, do they use the same type of data? So for example, let's say you built a model that can understand sentences like text, right? Mm-hmm. Now, once that model is working, I can use that in healthcare. I can use that for a search engine, even though they're like two separate industries, but the underlying model that can understand what a sentence means, extracting the intent and taking an action, I can use the same model. So there's commonality.
Right.
The second way in which this can happen is they have the same workflow. So for example, let's say the goal is, hey, I want to parse this image and identify objects in that image, right? Now, this concept can be used for an image search engine, or it can be used for a self-driving car, right? If I capture an image, I want to know if it's a person or a tree or a spike, right? So if the workflow is the same, then you can use the same model to achieve that. Another way, another aspect here is, do they have the same use case, right? So for example, predicting an event, right? Let's say that's the use case.
Right.
That is applicable to predicting if a pump is going down. That's applicable to predicting what my sales is going to be next month. Basically, again, commonalities, there's no like exact copy paste because data is so, the volume is so huge, it's unique. Exact copy paste is probably not possible. But what is possible is, if you look at something, if you break it down into components about like type of data, workflow, use case, now there's a lot of patterns. And that's why the machine learning industry is growing so fast is, again, people have realized that the underlying infra has been commoditized, right? Now we can build very interesting applications that are repeatable, that are scalable, and that are venture scale, if you will. So I think that's where it gets very interesting. Identifying those commonalities, they become products, right?
And
so
I guess my kind of lead, the follow on from that, because I had a sense that there might be some, I don't know, like economies of scale. I might not be using the right word there, but if you go and help a client who has sustainability aims in a particular area by measuring a bunch of stuff, applying a bunch of models to predict if that thing's going down, the next customer who comes along isn't like, all right, well, here's the new problem and let's start from ground zero again. It's like, oh no, there's going to be nuances, and the point of the machine learning models is to understand nuance, but it's applying that nuance in the same context. And so the frameworks that you use to apply types of machine learning models are reusable, and potentially some of the learnings that you get from one can be transferred to another, or at least heuristically. Is that kind of the world we're moving to, where companies like yourself are able to, like Plutoshift, are able to kind of grow and have this like an unfair advantage by scaling and seeing more of these problems and more of this data?
Yeah, the way it actually works out in practice is you're right in the sense that when you go to one company to the next, it won't be exactly the same, because the situation, especially when it comes to data, it tends to be unique. So what you do is you build a modular product. What that means is, if you build a monolithic product that does like one thing, right? It's all combined and you can't peek in.
Right.
That's a problem, because, you build that solution for one company and there's no way to reshape it in any way. So you go to the next one and you got to start all over.
Right.
But if you build a modular product where, let's say, your product consists of 20 modules, right? Now, that's where it gets interesting, because you can take some of them, stitch them together, and that becomes a solution for customer A. Customer B comes in and says, oh, that's, maybe part of that is relevant to them. So you take maybe half of that stitched item and then you take a few more modules, stitch it together. So the way this pans out is, if you have those modules that are more fundamental, then you can stitch these together and then you can make it very repeatable. And all of this is, you got to think in terms of how to make this product scalable.
Right.
And if you want to benefit from the economies of scale, then you got to have repeatable components. And again, that's what this architecture gives you.
Yeah, totally understand that. And like trying to elevate this actually up to kind of impact, out to impact. I was looking at your site earlier and looking at kind of the average impact that's been had across the board. I'm kind of interested in the collective impact. You guys are operating in one corner of the whole paradigm here, right? There's tons and tons of market space, and this space has a long way to play, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But if you had to kind of, and you should know this because you've got the data, I think, had to try and actually, express in terms that, a lay human would understand, what's the impact that, that Plutoshift has been able to have just in the customers you've been working with so far?
Yeah. So far, when we work with our customers, we, again, our primary outcome is reducing electricity consumption, chemical consumption, water consumption, right? And a simple example is for a company, we demonstrated that we saved 15.6 million gallons of water in a single year. And again, that's just at one facility. Now, if you scale that across for a single company, for a large company, it could mean up to 600 million gallons of water, right? That's a lot of water. That can keep a person well for like years and decades. It's a lot of water, right? So again, that's just one company. And imagine how many companies are there that are using water for their product, right? And again, and that's the kind of impact that we end up seeing is the physical infrastructure around the world is mind-bogglingly huge. It's I mean, it is the single biggest industry in the entire world, and by a margin, right? Because everything you think of, whatever we have, manufacturing, construction, mining, transportation, all of that is physical infrastructure, and this stuff is just there, and that's the impact we aim to have, is just help our customers drive these numbers down, and obviously help them meet their sustainability goals. So that's just one example here.
Yeah. And do you one of the companies that I haven't interviewed on this show yet, but I advised separately. They're focused on construction. They look at the embodied energy of materials in construction. They basically measure that, and then they help builders work out how to use less material. And so obviously their customer has a motivation of, I want my homes to be more energy efficient. But what's interesting about the way they operate as a company is they say, we measure all of the impact that all of our customers have, and that translates into the impact that we've had, right? That's the way we measure our impact. Is that how you think about Plutoshift? Is there an option? Ultimately, you're saying, hey, we actually have a goal here. We want to take 1 billion litres out of the system. Of water.
So our eventual, that's a great question. Our eventual goal is, so in terms of water, energy, chemicals, and carbon dioxide, so based on where we are today, the global impact is we want to offset the carbon footprint of 268 million people every year. And that is, again, that's just what is visible to us based on what we have seen, like what we have deployed, like proven results. And again, the potential is still more. Like as we deploy more, our reach is going to expand, and our power to make an impact is going to expand. But just today, if you ask me, hey, Plutoshift, you have done this much for existing customers. If you do it globally, what's going to happen? That's 268 million people, their carbon footprint getting offset every year, right? It's huge. It's enormous. Huge. And it's, I mean, when you think about it, it's magical. That's a lot of offset, right? So it's exciting.
Yeah, that's super exciting. By the way, is that the number extrapolated out from the impact you've had to the companies that you could be utilizing just that part of the thing you're doing?
The way we compute this is we aggregated our impact across our customers, and then we just kind of extrapolated that and on a global basis. So that's how we computed this.
I wondered whether you had I was trying to think of 268, it might be something squared, or, the square root of something, like it was some arbitrary, 1 billion people offset with Pluto.
No. So the way we see it is, I mentioned the 15 million gallons of water, that number. So we took energy savings, we took chemical savings, we took carbon emission savings. So we took that and we put a framework together to say, okay, if this works out, if it becomes global, right, what can Plutoshift do for humanity? And that's what we found out.
Yeah, that's a pretty gnarly goal. And kind of coming back to that, if you've managed to have this kind of impact with the companies that you've worked with so far, and in a lot of respects, this is inevitable, right? In my opinion, like the work still has to be done, but companies will always want to save money. And in the world we operate, will now want to have, the impact that they're having and the benefit of that, attract the talent and all the other things we spoke about. What's the blocker for them or for you in getting from the corner of the universe you're working into the 268 million? What's holding all this back?
So there's a couple of things then. So one, so to make this happen, right, we need continuous access to data, right? So again, I live in Palo Alto, California. So in the US, right, facilities are well instrumented, access to data is better. But for majority of the world, there's still, it's not as commoditized as it could be. So access to real-time data is a key barrier to this. And again, more companies are instrumenting it. They're getting better. But again, the sequence is, there's United States, there's North America, and then you expand to Europe and Asia, where a lot of the manufacturing happens now. the area is vast, right? So it's not as instrumented as it could be. So that's the one. So access to data. And two, the kind of making that part of your business, making that part of your plan, right? So the sooner you integrate this, the better it gets. So for example, the same thing happened to many companies about, call it 12, 13 years ago, where they said, oh, this cloud thing is a moving fad. We're going to stick with our on-prem servers. And it was a very, very painful transition for them because their customers said, so what do you mean you're going to send people to install it in my building? Why can't I just open up my browser and access your software? So it's like that, right? So if the sustainability or ESG has to become part of how you exist, how you play, and more companies are doing that, but it cannot be a separate like side project that you do every year and to show that, oh, look, I did an ESG project this year. Now, see ya. I'll see you next year. It's that can't happen because those companies are gonna get left behind. So access to data, making that part of your plan, and also the third thing is behavior change, like getting your people. If you ask your operations team to, hey, meet all of the goals of the job and do this extra thing just to show that we are doing, it's not going to happen, right? This should. By doing this, the job should become easier, like faster, better, right? And that's how you actually implement it at an operational level. So that is the other thing is it starts from the leadership. If the leadership thinks it's a hobby project, everybody in the company will think the same way. So if the leadership says, look, this is business imperative, we need to do this, and this is how we'll do it. Here are the tools to make your life a lot easier. Then it happens. So these are a couple of things. And again, as the leadership, the generation changes. The newer leaders are more conscious of things like data, software, ESG, attracting good talent, retaining good talent. So it's just, AI, yes, 100%.
Now that I've got a good definition for it. That totally makes sense. I guess I was asking for it in the context of what's the challenges in adoption broadly. I'm also interested in it from your perspective, from where you're standing. There's obviously the standard tropes of, well, if we had more resources and more people, we could be out talking to more customers and implementing more projects. So there is that. But it is part of, if you've got a company that has instrumented, whatever part of the world, and has that leadership, there's getting from 0 to 1, right? And so what's the challenge that you see in Plutoshift on a day-to-day basis in getting someone who is set up for taking this step to actually take the step?
Yeah, it's about the proof. Meaning, like, for example, many manufacturers, right, or many companies that are doing this, by nature, they are companies that sell, for example, let's take the example of a beverage. Like, you make a product and you know exactly what's going in, what's coming out. But this is a little more uncertain, right? It's not as simple as, you spend X dollars, you're going to get a bottle of beer. It's just not that. So I think just being comfortable with uncertainty, and also thing is creating a success template helps. Meaning just know, this is not something where you do it on a global basis first. It has to start at a site, at a facility, create a success template, and then you scale it up. It's a very software way of thinking and doing, right? As opposed to, if you're a manufacturer, you just think about things differently. But when it comes to software, when it comes to doing this, the way of implementation, the way of making this successful, it changes. So I think just having that mentality of, okay, I gotta pick a site, I gotta create a success template, I gotta make it easy, I gotta show that we put $1 into this site and here's what we got out. Because in big companies, there's so many sections, regions, divisions. Not everybody is going to be equally inclined towards doing this, right?
Very diplomatic.
So that's where I think success templates have been very helpful in driving this forward.
Yeah. And I kind of like to reduce, I'm obviously always being reductive here, but you don't have to go out and build a gigafactory to have this kind of stuff. You can start with, you already have a factory, it is already running, it consumes energy, and there is an opportunity to take some instrumentation or put some basic instrumentation in and see an 11% shift in the energy usage in this process in this factory only. And just observe that and see that working in your organization and train the muscle in the organization of people who do want to do it, but quite sure how to move that forward. I'm guessing that's part of what you guys have to do at Plutoshift is actually kind of
Yeah. That's exactly right. Again, at the end of the day, it basically, again, people are not like, oh, I'm definitely not, I don't want to do anything about climate. They're not like that. They're good people, but what they don't want is, look, I have this much budget and I just don't want to throw money into a black box. I need to know what's going to come out, right? And that's where, if we prove on a pilot project that, hey, we did this for this long and what went in and here's what came out, people are a lot more, they become a lot more open to doing this. Yeah.
And this is probably a good segue for me to how you arrived here, because a lot of what we've spoken about today isn't just instrumentation and I know how to build machine learning models, which I'm sure you do, but a lot of this is about the psychology of human behavior and behavior change generally. What's the arc of your story to be here doing Plutoshift, hanging out in Palo Alto? Talk me through this, the backstory.
Yeah. I grew up in a small town in southern India. Growing up, mathematics was something that I immediately latched onto. So it's nice, it's fun. I love, it gives me a lot of joy doing that. So when I found out about algorithms in mathematics, then I became interested in making machines do stuff on their own. Like, again, I never heard of machine learning because it was still too early.
Yeah.
And I was.
How long ago was this? 25 years ago, 20 years ago.
No, yeah, like something like I was still like finishing high school, entering college, about that time, where I knew enough advanced mathematics to know what can be done with it, but hadn't heard of machine learning yet. I just wanted the idea that you can get a machine to do stuff on its own was fascinating. And then I found out, there's a whole thing called machine learning dedicated to this specific thing. And it was fascinating. And that's how that led me to machine learning. And then, I finished college, and finished grad school, got my first job, all in machine learning. And the initial few years was spent in virtual infra, like cyberspace, meaning all the data is like search engines, e-commerce, very, very virtual. But what I saw was AI is not nearly as ubiquitous as it could be in the physical world, right? The physical world, I like things that I can touch and feel like it's real things. And so that was the core motivation behind launching Plutoshift, is to bring that powerful tool called machine learning into the physical world and make it ubiquitous. Like on a daily basis, we use video chat, we Slack, we Zoom, we email. We just assume, we just take it for granted. I want machine learning to be that simple to use for everybody, right? So that was the core motivation. And also it gave me a chance to weave in my passion for climate, right? So again, it started with water, right? I grew up in a pretty dry town. We used to get water again, it's not bad, but getting water every 3 days, that kind of leaves a mark on you, right?
Hold on. What do you mean getting it every 3 days? Having to go and get it, or the taps only work every third day?
The tap opens every third day. You store it until you get it the next time. That's your drinking water situation. It's not uncommon. In fact, I'm not unique in any way in that sense. And many people in India still face that situation, right? Yeah. Again, I was one of them growing up, but it's a very common problem, right? Where access to clean drinking water in America, we just assume you open the tap, the water is here. You don't even think about it. But many parts of the world, it's very difficult, right? It's not as easy. So that kind of left a mark. And again, we had water. It's not like 24/7, right? So that, and again, back then I didn't know it was called like a climate change. I wasn't thinking in those terms, not yet. I was just kind of, okay, water is an important thing to survive, and you don't have it. So what can you do here?
It's a small understatement, by the way.
Yeah.
You get about 3 days before you're toast if you don't have water. So.
Yeah. And again, my parents, my cousins, we all lived in this situation. So growing up, that water, and then when I gained enough understanding, then water morphed into the bigger climate problem. How can you use technology to solve climate problems? In my case, I know machine learning more than other technologies. So it became, okay, I have this tool that I know really well. How can I use that to solve a climate problem? So Plutoshift gave me that opportunity to merge my professional expertise, which is ML, and my passion, which is water, climate, and then we launched Plutoshift. Yeah.
And just specifically on the connectivity here, because I'm always trying to connect the dots. There's kind of a, if you've got organisation A who saves 15 million gallons, what was that?
Yeah.
Have I got that number?
Yeah.
I have no idea what that's in metric, by the way. So hopefully we'll get a metric number later. We'll put it in the notes.
Right.
And then do you see a world where ultimately, if we're reducing usage somewhere else, it also enables the build and infrastructure to shift the balance on the other side of that equation? If they save that water, that's great, but that water still has to end up somewhere else. As part of, the role here is to be kind of, one half of that equation, or do you also see that ultimately you guys will be able to play in the realm of actually the build of infrastructure to get it to where it needs to be, not have it used where it shouldn't be overutilized?
Yeah, the goal is, so two things then. If you can save water, like in this case, if you help a company use less water, then that water could be used somewhere else, like somebody who needs it. So it's redistributed. And two, there are many places around the world where access itself is the problem. Like in this case, in America, you have you have water, and then the goal is how do you use less water to make a product? That's the second half. The first half of that pipeline is getting water itself. So there are many regions in the world where access to water itself is a huge problem. So anything you can do to produce your output by using less water is of huge importance, because what happens is if you're in a region where a rich company sets up a plant, they'll get priority. Like somehow they'll take the water. And the problem is the many people who actually need water, the daily average consumer, average citizen, now they'll be left holding the bag, because guess what? The rich company is not gonna live without water, so they'll get what they need. But the problem is the locality, the neighborhood, the community. They're the ones who now have to live on less water. So if you help a company just be more efficient in terms of for every gallon of raw water, how much of that can you convert to good product? If that ratio gets better over time, then the people who need water will actually have water, right? So that's the other angle here.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Amazing. Well, Prateek, super lovely chatting to you about everything data and impact related. And I feel like we actually had a lot more that we could have dived into here. There's heaps more information on some of this stuff and the impact that you guys are having on your site. So for people who had as little understanding about data as I did, probably still have a lot more to learn. Really a good place to start. If you've got other resources for people who are interested in data and the impact that data can have in some of these sustainability goals, I'd love to get some of that from you afterwards, and we'll put some links to that as well.
Sure.
But thank you so much for being on Shape the System today. It was really excellent chatting to you.
No, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I loved the conversation. And I think we covered so many different aspects of this ecosystem. So thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. Have a good day.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.